You already know the answer. You're on the side of America first. And if they can't tell you why it's America first, you just won the argument, because they don't have one. Shut up, Nazi is no different from shut up, racist. By the way, it is okay to ask questions. And I thought that was like the whole reason we were against the left.
Tucker Carlson just delivered a rousing speech at Turning Point USA's December event. Remember, this is the speech that the Zionist billionaire donor class of Turning Point USA tried to get him canceled off the bill from delivering. Well, he gets into the MAGA civil war here, the ramifications on the right in general and on the Republican Party, and why his take on this clash between Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens is actually pretty unique in context of the controversy. So let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
But let me just say something more broadly about where the conservative movement, whatever that is, the people who voted for Trump, the Trump coalition, and the supposed civil war going on within that group. I don't think it's real. I think it's fake. I think it's totally fake. I don't think, and I've had cause to think a lot about this because I've been unwittingly involved in the proxy war. There are two things going on here, and I'm not guessing. One is jockeying for position post-Trump. So Trump created this amazing coalition, bringing in people who had never voted Republican before but were very enthusiastic about him. And that coalition took over the most powerful government in the history of the world. So there's a lot at stake here. And so the question becomes, who gets to run it after? Who gets the machinery when the president exits the scene? And there are a lot of people in Washington, maybe even in this room, who aren't quite sure what they want, but they know they don't want J.D. Vance. Okay? And so the attack, and you heard it from the stage tonight, there's someone here who's a very bad man, and he's friends with J.D. Vance. Could be me. I am sad about being used in a proxy war over politics in which I'm not involved in any level. I'm not an advisor to anybody. But I just think I should say that out loud, okay? There are people who are mad at J.D. Vance, and they're stirring up a lot of this in order to make sure he doesn't get the nomination. So this is true. So this raises the obvious question, which is, why are they mad at J.D. Vance? Such a nice guy, which he is.
Well, could it be his attachment to Palantir and the U.S. surveillance state? The fact that his political rise was orchestrated by Peter Thiel and the PayPal mafia? His attachment to the Israel First doctrine, much like Trump has? There's some real legitimate reasons to despise J.D. Vance. I don't think Tucker's going to talk about those. And I love Tucker. I adore him. I think he's right on almost all these questions, but not on J.D. Vance. And we really have to do some soul searching to find what the truth is behind this guy's political rise. He was basically astroturfed into power, becoming the vice president, and he is kind of the chosen one of that big tech, little tech mafia to bring in Vance and presumably give them better contracts and better opportunities to expand the surveillance state under Palantir and their dystopian schemes to unveil pre-crime programs, etc. I also don't agree that the MAGA civil war is fake, not by any stretch. These issues have been underpinning this movement for a long time, and they sure did happen prior to a year ago, or even before Charlie Kirk's death. You saw American conservatives wrestling with this mantra of America first and how it's so hypocritical when you're choosing Israel's side, a foreign regime's side, on everything at the detriment of the American public. I think that's at the heart of it, and it's not fake.
They're mad at J.D. Vance because he is the one person, and things could change, of course, but right now, who really kind of buys the core idea of the Trump coalition. Now, what is that idea? Ladies and gentlemen, anyone know? Anyone know? America first. It's America first. It's really simple. Which I notice some people are pretty anxious to retire that phrase. Remember when they told us? That's a bigoted phrase. Really? It is. And then they just decided to ignore it in favor of MAGA, Make America Great Again, which I'm obviously for. But how do you make America great again? By putting America first. Now, what does that mean? I'll be more precise.
Well, yeah, that's how you do it. The problem is that's not what this administration has done, and that's why MAGA has become a meme. It's MEGA now. It's Make Israel Great Again. And that is just unavoidable. If you're following these matters with Mike Huckabee meeting Jonathan Pollard, bombing Iran, starting a new war there, bankrolling a genocide in Gaza, calling for the Knesset to drop all corruption and fraud charges against Netanyahu, allowing Israel to bomb Qatar, another U.S. ally, without repercussions, it just gets too impossible to ignore. That's why it's become a meme. It is what Americans wanted. They gave the president a mandate for that, but he chooses Israel over America.
It's not a complicated concept. It's a really simple concept. The U.S. government, the largest organization in human history with the most well-funded military in history, ought to, in all the decisions it makes, put the interests of American citizens first. That's it. Oh!
Imagine that.
That's creepy. Sounds kind of fascist. You're going to invade Poland now? No, just the opposite. In fact, the original America Firsters were kind of against wars, and the current ones are too. Actually, it just means what it sounds like. The government ought to serve the people who pay for it, who elected them, in whose name the business of government is conducted.
Yeah, ideally that's the case, but really, they actually pay heed to the Zionist lobby that pays them, and the banks that pay them, and the military-industrial complex that pays them. It's this national lobbying that buys off organizations. And when Tucker is saying that, he says, you know, a glimmer of truth when it comes to serving those that pay him, but meeting the national lobby. That's what's happening. I don't think Tucker's a general fan of that whatsoever, but that is how government is run, and it's run that way regardless of whether you elect Trump, Biden, Obama, or Bush. It just is how it's run, to our great detriment.
That's all it means. Now, there are two things to know about this idea. The first is, almost everyone's for that. Like, what percentage, if you polled that idea in the supposedly fractious Trump coalition that's in the middle of a civil war, what percentage of people would disagree with that? Well, a few. You know, people whose names you know. Well, that sounds like America only. No, it's not. Just America first, simple. But like probably 95% of Trump voters would be for that. And I bet you like probably 70% of people who didn't vote for Trump would be for that. And if you calmed down and explained it to them, probably like 90%. Why? Because it's self-evident, like most true things. And moreover, and think this through for a second, there is no other legitimate rationale for running our government.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's no doubt Tucker's making this point that everyone thinks that. Well, I don't necessarily think that it's everyone that thinks that, it's just everyone that says that. But at the same time, the Zionist neocons, the Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Laura Loomer types, will say, hey, I'm America first, as kind of the precursor to building a propaganda scheme around having to try to explain why serving the interests of Israel, why bankrolling them is somehow America first, even though it's blatantly obvious that it isn't. So of course everyone will say that, everyone will admit that just about, everyone involved in this kerfuffle on the right will say it, but they just come up with propaganda to shift that in the direction of still supporting this foreign regime, even if they claim it. These were never Trumpers. Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro and others that were part of the neocon ilk, the part that didn't see the war in Iraq as a bad thing, if at all, until very, very late, that did see the empire-building projects in the Middle East on behalf of Israel as a good thing, the war in Syria, the war in Libya, the long-term occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq, bombing Somalia for over 2 decades now, the proxy war in Yemen. These people were for all of it, generally speaking. And they'll still say we're America first, even though that doesn't benefit Americans in any way.
We have self-government. This is a democratic republic. It exists for our benefit. The documents are written that way. The point of the American Revolution was to make that point. And so if you're not operating the federal government on behalf of U.S. citizens, you're illegitimate. You actually have no right to rule. Period. And if you disagree, tell me what the other legitimate justification is. Oh, because my friends or people I agree with or in my interest group or, no.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and set up new government that more serves their interests. And the only genuine, benefit of government is the type of government that protects life, liberty, and property. We're so far off the rails from that, and I'm not even saying I totally agree with that. I'm even more of a voluntarist than Jefferson was. But at the same time, that is the basis of the political system. So when government runs roughshod over the interests of its own citizens at the behest of this foreign, rogue, genocidal regime, that's a real problem, whether you're on the left or right.
The government must, this is non-negotiable, operate on behalf of American citizens. So once you realize that that's the statement at the center of the debate, it all becomes pretty clear. Really clear, actually. It's not an ideological debate. There's nothing ideological about that. I've got all kinds of kooky ideological views. I love Knowles' list of all the views. I probably had most of them in my long and varied life. I have fewer now. I just kind of want to see a good faith effort to improve the country. That's it. And I'm ever aware that I'm not exactly sure the right way a lot of times. Are tariffs the best way to help the country? I don't know. I hope so. Not an expert.
Spoiler, no, they're not. And only the American right could be so stupid for falling for the idea that more central economic planning and more taxation is the road to prosperity. It's the same thing that the left does when falling for the minimum wage. It's like, well, if you want a $30 minimum wage, why not make it $10,000 an hour minimum wage instead? And if you can answer why that's not the greatest idea, you should also be able to answer why 10,000% tariffs on Chinese goods isn't a good idea, or trade embargoes, or shutting down all foreign trade, or shutting down trade between American states, or shutting down trade between American citizens. The extensions of both of these arguments are preposterous. The right's generally accepted it now, and it is to our detriment.
All I really care about is that the people in charge care, that they love the people they lead. That is the first and most important requirement of leadership. A father who loves his children may make mistakes, probably will, inevitably will. I did. But if he loves his kids, he'll do a pretty good job, and they'll be fine. An officer who loves his men, he can't control the battle, but they'll do better than the officer who doesn't. The president who truly loves his people will, over time, tend to make wiser decisions on their behalf. But the leaders who don't care at all, they'll destroy your country. And that is absolutely what we've had. That's, by the way, not noted as an effort to blackpill you, or an effort to discourage you or convince you have no agency or control. You have a lot of control. You just changed the government. Good.
Yeah, something tells me that changing the government and just voting the bums out hasn't really changed it, though, because those entrenched lobbies still exist. So what you really need is to withdraw support from the system, to nullify the egregious, immoral, or unconstitutional edicts or laws from the federal government at a local level. That's what it really will take. So this voting the bums out strategy hasn't done much, despite how it's marketed, who gets in power, like Trump, claiming to drain the swamp. And just the swamp never gets drained. Instead, he surrounds himself with the deepest and dungiest swamp creatures imaginable. So forgive me if I think that the composition of the legislature isn't the exact problem here. It's the deep entrenched lobbies and the deep state operating these empire-building schemes, these corporate welfare schemes, these economic central planning schemes, regulatory schemes, police state schemes, surveillance schemes, at our great, great harm.
But if you want to know what the debate is going forward and what your job is going forward, it's holding your leaders to that very simple standard. Not on tariffs or any of these specific policy questions necessarily, but on their motive. Can you look me in the face and explain to me why the thing that you are doing, the money you're appropriating, can you tell me why that helps our country and our people? Tell me how. And if you're doing the whole shut up racist thing, then I have a right to question your motives, actually. Why can't you answer the question? Why can't you answer that question? Why do you have to imply that some college kid is like some kind of Hitlerite or something because he's asking about an event? Like, what?
Or pledging solidarity with the poor, beleaguered peoples of Gaza just because they're on the opposite side of this rogue regime that America's funding? That you're just going to call them, oh, they've chosen the side of Hamas. They're terrorists. They're terrorist sympathizers. That's just part of the Zionist neocon propaganda plan. And Tucker's exactly right. The whole shut up racist thing that the liberal establishment used to do and still does to some extent, it's just been replaced by a slightly tainted right-wing flavor of that same strategy. And that's shut up, anti-Semite. It's the same strategy. It's wokeness on both sides of the coin, and you're seeing the right deploy it in spades right now.
By the way, it is okay to ask questions. And I thought that was like the whole reason we were against the left. They're not going to force you to get up there and make ritual denunciations because this isn't my religion, it's politics. By the way, your politics do not trump my love for other people. I remember my brother once said, I have one brother who's my best friend, and he once said something lunatic, as brothers do. And I remember all these reporters, one from the Washington Post, which used to be a newspaper in Washington, calling me and being like, will you denounce your brother? I said, son, if my brother went on a drug-related murder spree, I would not denounce him. What? Are you for drug-related murder sprees? No, I'm for my brother. And nothing will ever make me not for my brother. Now, I'd probably tell him no more drug-related murder sprees for you. I'm not for that. I'm not for a lot of things, actually. But I will never, ever denounce people I love to satisfy the mob.
Amen. That is the mentality we all should have as dissidents. And I don't disavow or condemn anyone on demand. That's just being led and coerced into a position someone else wants you to have. So even if someone said, Dave, denounce Ben Shapiro right now, or you're going to have to be disregarded entirely, I'd say no. You know, my words and opinions on Ben Shapiro should be pretty self-evident. I don't make it a mystery that I'm against his ilk and the Zionist control base over the American political system, and especially over our foreign policy, but I don't denounce anyone on demand. So of course I'm not going to denounce someone close to me for differences of opinion. People that I love don't just have that love severed by me being able to smear them in public for the benefit of someone's political cause. Not whatsoever. So I won't even smear people on demand that I've smeared, because that's Orwellian. I don't get led that way. I have my own opinions. I'm my own sovereign man.
Right? I mean, it's crazy. So as you think through, like, what should this movement be, and what side should you take on the conservative civil war? You already know the answer. You're on the side of America first. And if they can't tell you why it's America first, you just won the argument, because they don't have one. Shut up, Nazi is no different from shut up, racist. It's a little more annoying, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the same scheme, the same propaganda tool to try to collectivize people into groups and lead them into political directions that you seek and you wish them to be led into, getting kind of the best benefit from your position that you can, using the propaganda apparatus to do it, where every legitimate criticism against Israel is just called anti-Semitic. Americans are having none of it anymore. A lot of us aren't. Some people are still scared by those tactics, but those tactics are being so tired and worn out. You can only cry wolf so many times before the wolf actually appears, and it turns out that all the times in which you cried wolf, where there was no wolf, have already tarnished people's opinions on this, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening on the American right. This attachment to Israel, this rigid attachment to Israel that basically almost everyone on the right used to have, save, Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan, is just being dropped by vast swaths of the right now. The distant left has been right on this a long time. Praise to them. And good for you if you were on that side. Well, on the American right, it's too few and far between, but it is happening more and more, especially among younger age groups. You're seeing that in the Turning Point USA audience. You saw that in their, I believe, July event with Tucker Carlson there and Dave Smith debating Josh Hammer there, where Dave Smith got more pops arguing against the pro-Israel attachment, and Tucker Carlson saying, well, Epstein probably worked for Israel. And we've substantiated that since that, but he got a lot of props for saying that. And not only did he say that, which, by the way, the Zionist billionaire donor class of Turning Point USA didn't want him to say, he also said, you know, it's not innately anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, and we should never pretend it is. And it's actually villainous if someone says that it is, because that's wrong. Well, again, this is where the American youth are being led, and this is at the crux of the Civil War in MAGA. And I talked to Dave Smith about this recently, and one of the points he said is that, you know, whether or not Civil War is the right term for this or not, there's certainly a schism on the American right on this issue, and it's been happening long before Charlie Kirk's death. So people like Tim Pool and Matt Walsh, who claim that that was the start of this rift, are just plain wrong. This issue has been apparent all over the American right, especially since October 7th. What happened after it? America getting dragged into war, giving Israel $25 billion, you know, treating freaking Jonathan Pollard, the convicted Israeli spy that gave U.S. secrets to the Israeli government at the height of the Cold War, which were then passed on to the Soviets, by the way, treating him like royalty, and then having the president's spokesman say, we stand with our ambassador. It's just rubbing too many people the wrong way. And Charlie Kirk's letter to Benjamin Netanyahu is very emblematic of the schism. He's saying, we're getting our asses handed to us. I can't justify Israel's atrocities in Gaza anymore. We need more than this crazy, stupid Hasbara line, and I refuse to be the middleman for it anymore. You know, Charlie Kirk was an ardent supporter of Israel for most of his life, but at the end of it, he was turning against it. That pissed off the Zionist billionaire donor class in his own organization and led to him 48 hours before his death sending into a private chat room the idea that I have decided to leave the pro-Israel cause. And not only should we have Tucker Carlson speak at this very event, that speech you just watched was the one that he wanted to invite Tucker Carlson to, you know, to the chagrin of Bill Ackman and Robert Shillman and other donors to his organization. He also suggested in that same chat group, maybe we should invite Candace Owens too. Imagine that. It's not exactly how you alleviate tensions, but this is building to the brim. It's not a 50-50 divide whatsoever, because almost no one's willing to defend all these attachments anymore, save for Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro and Laura Loomer and a few others. But it's like, there's a stark contrast between the support level of someone like Tucker Carlson, the most prominent voice on the American right, and someone like Mark Levin, who has 1/4 of this channel's subscribers on his YouTube. And by the way, I don't consider myself anyone. I'm a nobody, but I still have much more support on YouTube than Mark Levin does at this point. That's pretty telling. There is a divide. It's not a 50-50 divide, but you can see that this Zionist class is in the death throes, trying to maintain relevancy in an age where Americans are rejecting it, really for the first time on the American right. But what do you guys think? Do you think I'm right? Do you think Tucker's right? What is the crux of the MAGA Civil War? What are your thoughts about J.D. Vance? What are your thoughts about how this is going to affect Republican politics going forward? Will there be some time in which you get Republican candidates up there saying, I don't want any foreign aid going to Israel? How soon will that be? If so, let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Tucker. Great speech. There were some other good moments tier 2. I liked that segment. I thought there's some interesting themes in there, though I disagree that this is fake. I certainly don't think that this struggle is a fake struggle. I think it's very tangible and very relevant, and I'm glad to see it's playing out. Also, if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you can help support the channel. And if you do that, I'll give you immediate access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And I'll really appreciate your support if you do. You'll be able to see those members-only videos right away if you do. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to a website. You just plug in your email there, and I'll send you a free PDF copy of that book, free of charge, no obligation, just because I appreciate your interest. And my demands are simple, as always. No more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.
There is no overridingly value strategic interest in Israel for the United States. Like, what are we getting out of this? Nothing. It's only cost. Why are we spending billions of dollars destroying our credibility, paying for the murder of children? Like, how is that good for us? I guess it's good for Bibi. Okay. that's not true. They share our values. No.
Tucker Carlson just exposed the one-sided and immoral nature of the U.S.-Israeli alliance, and in this clip, in an interview with Doha Forum, he talks about the solution, and that's to cut all ties with Israel, that the United States only bears cost. We don't benefit from this relationship, this twisted and toxic relationship, in any single way. So let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Can I start by asking you why Americans, or if you feel Americans, have many misconceptions about this part of the world?
Well, because, you know, most people, not just Americans, but most people haven't been here. I mean, that's always the number one source of misconception, is lack of experience, direct experience. And so and I'm so blessed by my job that I can travel, but I've traveled my whole life to places, and so I'm convinced that it's hard to really know what you're talking about unless you see it. And even then, it's hard to know. You don't speak the language. You're not from there. But you definitely don't have a sense of a place unless you visit it. So that's the main reason. And then there's, of course, lots of propaganda efforts going on designed to influence the direction of the U.S. government and the use of military force. And so there are sophisticated propaganda operations going on in Washington full-time, come from a lot of different sources. So those are the reasons.
Yeah, there's a concerted effort to pretend that Qatari influence is more palpable in the U.S. federal government than obvious Israeli influence. And we see that in the form of the propaganda machine calling Tucker Carlson a paid Qatari shill, as if Qatar isn't on the same page with Israel in many ways. In fact, the biggest U.S. airbase exists in the Middle East, in Qatar, just to protect Israel. And you see that there have been ties between those two countries working in concert, where it's not exactly like they're diametrically opposed in the way that Israel sees, for instance, Iran. For instance, Netanyahu and the Likudniks funneled $1 billion through Qatar to fund Hamas, propping up Hamas. It's the biggest egg on Netanyahu's face, what should forced him to resign over. But that's what you get here. So there's this mass propaganda engine to project and take culpability off of Israel's disproportionate and twisted relationship with the United States and influence it has on our government.
And in terms of the propaganda that you mentioned, do you think things are changing now? You know, there's been talk of this shift away in American politics from a kind of unquestioning support for Israel. This has been a very difficult year, another very harrowing, difficult year in the region, not just in Gaza, but many other countries, Syria, Lebanon, escalation between Iran and Israel. What is your reading of all of this and you know, Washington's kind of approach right now?
Well, the U.S., I'm speaking as an American who's from Washington. America should never pledge its support to any other country unconditionally. And that would go for the countries of my ancestors, Great Britain, Sweden, Finland, and it would go for Israel, Qatar, Saudi, UAE. And there is no country in the world to which the United States owes its unconditional support. That's crazy. The people who run the United States pledge their unconditional support only to American citizens and their voters. That's our system.
But yeah, so as you say, it's about accountability to the voters.
But it's really not. It's about accountability to the banks and Big Pharma and the military-industrial complex and the Israel lobby and big tech and big communications and big food and big medicine. All of that is the real constituency of Congress. Let's just be real about it. But I'm with Tucker Carlson that no country should enjoy unconditional support from the United States, including his ancestors, including my ancestors. There's no way in which that's feasible or logical. Americans don't benefit just from these ties to a foreign country where we get dragged into wars that they want, including the most recent one in Iran, which I don't think we've heard the end of, by the way. It's why we got sucked into the war in Yemen, to blockade the Yemenis at the behest of the Saudis. It's why we deposed Gaddafi in Libya. It's why we deposed or helped depose Assad in Syria. through a clandestine CIA operation to fund ISIS and Al-Qaeda because Israel didn't like Assad as much as the fundamentalist Sunnis in that country. That's what we get from a 20-year occupation of Iraq. And don't get me wrong, there are culpable neocons and Israel shills in the federal government that made that happen. But it's not worth it. Get out of these stupid entangling alliances and empire-building projects. It's never worth it. Americans don't benefit, especially when we're suffering under debt and inflation and propaganda that divides us against each other over, our relative adherence to this rogue regime. I want nothing of that.
But has something shifted in the last couple of years amongst their voters? Is there is the kind of consciousness being raised in a way? Are there conversations happening with regards to the Palestinians and maybe even other issues in the region that were not happening 5 or 10 years ago?
Look, whenever the U.S. government acts on behalf of anyone other than American citizens, it is committing a moral crime. It is undermining the American system, which again is designed for one purpose, and that's to represent American citizens. It's self-government. It's a democratic republic. That's our system.
That's supposed to be the system. That's supposed to be the intent, but it's totally perverted, and it just comes off as kind of blue-pilled when you pretend otherwise. Now, I don't think Tucker is pretending otherwise. He's saying that's what we should have, and that's being violated by this relationship with Israel.
If you want to change the system and make it into some sort of autocracy that acts on behalf of another country, okay, change the system. But under our current system, it is immoral and illegal to act on behalf of another country over and above your country, period. So it's a foundational question. It's the foundational question. And that only happens when people don't know it's happening and aren't allowed to talk about it happening. And now people are talking about it, and of course the beneficiaries of our current perversion don't want to allow that conversation, but we have free speech in the United States. So what you're seeing is people exercising their free speech, and you're seeing a debate that is long overdue. And if there's another side to it, if you think that the point of the U.S. government is to serve a foreign country, tell me how.
But can I ask you?
Yeah, absolutely. That is correct. You're seeing people pitted against each other in the United States over this question, over how much they support Israel. Not over issues pertinent to their community, their lives, and their interests, but how far you cling to the Israel First doctrine. And I talked about this to Dave Smith. That's what the current MAGA civil war of sorts is being waged over. It's this question of siding with the Zionist Israelis on every single issue to the point where you're going to let the U.S. ambassador to Israel meet with Jonathan Pollard, the convicted Israeli spy who gave U.S. secrets from naval intelligence to the Israelis at the height of the Cold War, whereupon the Israelis passed them to the Soviet Union. It's when you let Israel get away with bombing Qatar, and there's no real ramifications for it. That's what we're dealing with.
If the conversation was long overdue, why is it only happening now?
People can only be led into an arrangement that acts against their own interests if they don't know it's happening or they're not permitted to notice it. Once they know it's happening and they're allowed to talk about it, it ends. It's literally that simple. So it's all about, are you allowed to say the obvious? And Americans, for a bunch of different reasons, using a bunch of different mechanisms, have not been allowed to do that. Now they are. I would give a lot of the credit to Elon Musk for buying and opening up Twitter, which he renamed X, and all of a sudden there's a vigorous conversation about obvious things. Once that happens, there's no stopping it. And where we're going to arrive at some point, I think soon, is at the core promise of our existing system, which is the U.S. government is here to serve American citizens first and foremost. Sorry. Yeah, there's no stopping that. And there's no counter argument. So it's, if you say that, we'll shut you down, we'll silence you, we'll slander you, we'll shoot you. Making physical threats against people who are telling obvious truths. They are doing that a lot, including to me.
Do you feel?
Yeah, there's this saying by Ron Paul, my great hero, when he said, an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government. And that's what you're seeing play out now. Finally, people on the right questioning this attachment to Israel that hasn't paid dividends to our interests. And that's why people are speaking out against it. That's why you're seeing a massive swing in terms of sympathy toward the Palestinians since October 7th, a 50-point swing in that direction. Imagine any other issue where that could happen in U.S. politics. I don't really think there is.
You made quite a few trips here, but has something changed in the way you feel in the last couple of years? Do you feel
I feel
safe?
that I'm 56, my children are grown. I have an obligation, from my perspective, to tell the truth. In decency and kindness, by the way. Telling the truth does not mean attacking people or pointing out their obvious sins. No, telling the truth means telling the truth in love. What do you think is true? By the way, I've been wrong many times. I supported the Iraq War, okay? I've been wrong. And I know that I've been wrong, and I know that I will be wrong again. So I'm not claiming I have a monopoly on the truth. What I'm saying is, as an American citizen, I have a right to say what I think, and I'm going to.
Right on. Amen, brother. I was wrong about that too. I cheerled for the war in Iraq in 2003, and it's pretty embarrassing. But admitting that is powerful too, and I think that's why many people appreciate Tucker Carlson. He has humility to admit his past mistakes. Try to say that about Ben Shapiro. He doesn't. He never did. But Tucker does. He said, I supported evil. I supported monstrous murder machine in the form of the U.S. military. But there's power in turning away from that and exposing the truth also, and getting your audience to see past follies such that we try not to replicate those and advance those and keep those going into new eras and applying them to more countries. There's value in that.
Period.
How could this fight to reshape the American right possibly define how the U.S. engages with the Middle East? Could it potentially change everything?
The President of the United States recently sided in public with an Arab country over Israel. Israel bombed Doha. Qatar is one of our most important allies in the region. Our largest air base is in this country, Qatar. Qatar hosts Hamas at the request of the United States government and the Israeli government for more than 10 years. And Israel bombed a meeting here in Qatar in order to short-circuit Donald Trump's peace process. This was an attack not just on Qatar, but on America. Donald Trump saw it that way. He said he saw it that way, and he forced the Israelis to apologize to the government of Qatar. Nothing like that has ever happened. There's never been a situation where the U.S. president publicly took the side of an Arab country over Israel. That just happened.
All right, so here's where I'll push back. Yes, Trump publicly sided with Qatar over Israel on that bombing and forced the Israelis to apologize, but that didn't change any policy, any of the foreign policy itself. It wasn't an actual ramification against Israel. Did they withdraw any of the aid? Did it change palpably the U.S. strategy in the Middle East and siding with Israel literally on everything? No, it was just a media spectacle to get Netanyahu on the phone with the Qatari government and apologize. It didn't lead to any changes. Also, I'll push back when Tucker said that, the U.S. president has never sided with an Arabic nation over Israel. I think there are a few examples, one of which was the only great foreign policy instrument that Obama ever created, and that was the JCPOA. He sided against Israel in doing that. Netanyahu and the Israeli government hated that gesture, that strategy, because it took off the table the regime change they ever wanted in Iran. And it's why Trump shredded the JCPOA in his first term, opening the door to regime change there. There's other examples too where, for instance, Israel supported Iran in the Iraq-Iran war when the United States was supporting Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war. And the U.S. later supported Iran too. But that's a time in which the U.S. president sided effectively with an Arab country over Israel to some extent. They're few and far between examples, but they did exist.
That is a huge change. That is a seminal change. What are its long-term effects? I can only guess, but we've never seen that before.
And what about countries in the region? Just one final question. What about countries in the region? How might this shift in American politics possibly change the way that they engage? Could there be a rare opportunity for them to engage in a way that they haven't in this changing landscape?
I can't speak for any GCC government. I am an American, and so I will explain what I believe is the American perspective, which is we align with countries that share our values, but mostly we align with countries that have some strategic benefit to us. And this is a resource-dense part of the world. Energy is essential for civilization. And the country that we're most closely allied with has no resources. It has 9 million people. It is a completely insignificant country in the Levant. I'm speaking of Israel. It is an insignificant country from an American point of view. The only reason Israel is significant is because we provide a security guarantee. So we have to defend Israel because I'm not sure why. We have no moral obligation to defend Israel whatsoever. And there's no American interest inherent in Israel. They're the holy sites, which are great, and I think the world should be allowed access to them, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to the Church of the Nativity, and to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and to the Wall. But as a nation, as a secular nation, there is no overridingly value strategic interest in Israel for the United States. Like, what are we getting out of this? Nothing. It's only cost. Whereas, for example, the 6 GCC nations, there's a very obvious benefit to the United States.
Yeah, I have to largely agree with this. The one thing I will say is that I don't think it's rightful or pertinent or, the right strategy or policy to just align with other nations on behalf of them having similar values to us. No, we should just trade. The most beneficial strategic alliances on Earth are built through voluntary trade. They're not through military alliances or security guarantees. Those kind of entangling alliances are what Thomas Jefferson and George Washington warned about. The idea that you're going to get entangled in these foreign structures, these foreign alliance structures that allow us to inherit all of the enemies of our allies. It just hasn't served to our benefit. We know that at least since World War I, the Great War especially. It just never benefits us in any single way. And I'm with Tucker on, there's no strategic interest in Israel. Many Zionists have tried to purport that there is, and they usually say, well, they share our values. That's what Tucker is saying. You should align with countries that do share your values. And that's what the neocons say about Israel. Well, I don't think that's true. You share our values? Look at Gaza. What kind of American value does that share? None of them. Getting to a new war with Iran. No value shared over that. We don't want neocon regime change wars anymore.
So, of course, we should be closely allied with all 6 of these countries. And I know that they're constantly fighting with each other. But again, I'm an American looking at it from an American perspective. Those are very important relationships. Much more important than our relationship with Israel. Much more important. If you were to assess what's in America's interest, purely that way, like we're gonna have relationships with other countries based on what's good for us. You would rate your relationship with Qatar, for example, as infinitely more important than your relationship with Israel. Infinitely more important. Now, there are a lot of people dedicated to lying about that. That's not true. They share our values. No. Qatar is a much more important relationship than a relationship with Israel. And I think that's starting to dawn on people. Why are we spending billions of dollars destroying our credibility, paying for the murder of children? Like, how is that good for us? I guess it's good for Bibi. Okay. But it's not good for us. And everyone knows it's not good for us. And only when they stick a gun in your face and tell you to shut up are you going to pretend that it's good for you. But if you're allowed to think for yourself, you realize that is not good. Period.
Amen. That's not good, period. Indeed. Tucker's exactly right about that. As far as whether it's more beneficial to align with Qatar over Israel, I don't want that choice. I don't want to align with either of those countries. I don't want empire building projects in the Middle East that serve as justifications to put new U.S. bases up, as if 750 or 800 or whatever it is right now isn't enough. I don't think you have to decide between Qatar and Israel. I know that makes me the odd man out, right, in political discourse, where it's either Israel's the big problem for everything or Qatar's the big problem for everything. Well, actually, what the problem is a systematic attachment to foreign countries and deference to those countries over the United States, over our domestic woes, over the concerns of citizens that elect the government. And I think elections are largely a sham. The two major parties get filtered through the system where nominees are guaranteed to have to support Israel to become the nominee. That's part of the process, and that was the biggest litmus test, it seems, to be in Trump's cabinet, where every single member of the cabinet, whatever their spectrum of thoughts is on various issues, they are Zionist. That was the litmus test, and that's what Miriam Adelson guaranteed when she gave Trump $100 million in his last campaign. And Sheldon Adelson gave Trump hundreds of millions of dollars in the previous electoral cycles. That's what you get. It's this Israel first attachment that's so pervasive in this presidential administration, in Congress, and in the bureaucracy. And it's not going to stop until AIPAC and the Israel lobby loses its influence here. And I do think that their support is being chipped away at. There is a rich donor class willing to continue to facilitate that, despite how many Americans just have turned their heads around on that issue and retreated from that mentality where that's what we have to support. That has to be a big part of a person's political platform. That Zionist donor class will still exist, but Americans have turned away. That might translate eventually and manifest into political changes. I don't think it's going to be in the next few years, but I do think it will be in 10 years. I can't say it's going to affect the 2028 elections. I'd imagine we do get a pro-Israel Republican nominee and a pro-Israel Democratic nominee, as we basically always do. But at the same time, these things take time to manifest politically. It's like Breitbart when he said that politics is downstream from culture. I think that's true, but the independent media is helping to expose the vile and immoral nature of this attachment, which, as Tucker said, is leading to the literal murder of children. And then we're supposed to back that, we're supposed to justify that, and then we're supposed to make excuses for that. Like, they're all Hamas. All the 20,000 children that have been killed by Israel since October 7th are Hamas. This disproportionate murder machine that's unfurled by the Likudniks and the Greater Israel Project to expand the West Bank settlements in Syria and Lebanon, to get into new wars with Iran during it, to bomb Qatar, another U.S. ally, and have that lead to no ramifications for Israel. Well, Americans have had enough. Americans that follow this have had enough. And even Americans that don't follow Middle East foreign policy that closely, I think are starting to wake up to this idea that this is just a twisted sense of priorities. This priority structure is not something that Americans can support. So while they go to the grocery stores and gas stations and pay out the gazoo for food and fuel, they know that their government, instead of caring about that, just cares about funneling money into Netanyahu's pockets. Boasts about the attachment to the Adelsons and giving Israel everything they want. That's what they see on the screen from Trump. They see the cover-up of the Epstein files and a scandal to not tell the truth about that. They see the idea of potential regime change in Venezuela being at the forefront of the minds and masterminds in Washington. That's what they see. But what do you guys think? Do you think Tucker Carlson's right about this? Is this leading our government astray from the interests of Americans? What's the best solution? Is it to attach closer with countries like, the UAE or Qatar over Israel? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Doha Forum. Great conversation, really appreciated it. Thank you for the questions. And if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button down below. And if you do that, you can get immediate access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below, and that'll shoot you out to a site where you can just plug in your email, and then I'll send you a free PDF copy of that book. No cost or obligation, just because I appreciate you. And as always, our demands are simple. No more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.